Hi guys, Liz here, aka Isabel Sharon, aka Liz for Paris, Adored, Bondi Babe, and all my bots. Welcome to another Coffee with Isa. The sim that I'm in today is called Devon, and I will link to that in my blog, which will be underneath this video in the description. It's a beautiful sim if you want to come and have a check it out, and they've got a number of sort of platforms to it, so it's well worth coming. Okay. The topic that I was asked to talk about that I didn't want to talk about last week is depression. And the reason I didn't want to talk about it is, although I know about depression in terms of I've had my own experiences with it, I didn't think that qualified me to give a talk on it, basically, without sort of looking further into it and sort of understanding it more from another perspective other than my own experience. So that is what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, but obviously whatever I'm going to say today is from my own experience, as well as I'm going to be referring to one website called mentalhealth.org.uk, and I'm referring to that because it's a reputable website and offers some very helpful information and refers to other websites, specifically in the UK, but obviously I might link to some extra ones in my blog, which will take you to, for example, Australia, United States of America. I'll have a look around the world and I'll pop them in my blog. But yeah, so it was a topic that was asked of me because of the relationship of it to being in the virtual world as well. So I'm going to try and address all of that. But first of all, let me say, I apologise now in advance. I sound like a nasally person. That's because I've not been well. I've caught a bug that's been going around at work, and I've been laid off a few days. I didn't go to work Thursday and Friday. I've been feeling really sick, standing up, and I'd get really dizzy and nearly pass out. So that's sort of how it started. Severe stomach pain, then started the nose running, and then the cough. You name it. I've got woman flu, okay? No, I've got a bug, and everyone at work. And the thing is, it's funny because when I was at work the other day, before I started to notice that I was coming down with it, you'd hear it was disgusting, honestly. I could hear Fleming across the room. It was just awful. The amount of people coughing, it was a bit like a domino effect, and it was going rippling through the floor, and I was just sitting there quite sort of like, really, go home because I was so annoyed, because I just knew with all of that going round, I stood a high chance of getting it. And sure enough, a couple of days later, after I noticed all of this, I start to feel a bit sort of heady at work, sort of a bit nauseous, that kind of thing. Throat hurts. Then I wake up Thursday and that's it. I go to stand up and whoa, I had to hold on to the wall. It was just So I spent most of Thursday on my sofa because I didn't want to spend it in bed. So I spent it on my sofa. I did catch up on a lot of Walking Dead, I have to admit. But I spent it on my sofa in a sort of like horizontal way. Is it horizontal when you're laying down? Oh God, I can't remember. But yeah, horizontal, and watching TV and then falling in and out of consciousness, basically. Because the minute I'd sit up or stand up, I felt like I was going to pass out. So that's how I spent much of my Thursday. Friday I woke up, it was less of that passing out feeling. It only happened sort of intermittently, but then of course started the nose running, and now I'm sort of left with still a bit of a runny nose and a voice that wants to go. So good luck with listening to me. Anyhow, depression. Okay, I was asked to talk about this in terms of real life depression and also depression, how it fits into the virtual world. So first of all, what I will do is basically give you a sort of rundown about depression. Okay, first of all, let's be clear. It is a very common mental disorder, and it's that common that, you know what, I don't think any family can say that there isn't at least one person within that family that they are aware of has suffered depression or is suffering depression at some stage in their lives. I think it's so common that I think actually everybody, in my viewpoint, this is my viewpoint, I believe everybody at some stage in their lives has some kind of experience with depression, whether they've acknowledged it or not, or they understand it or not. They've all had that moment in time where they've experienced a loss of interest or pleasure, feelings of guilt, or low self-worth, having disturbed sleep or your appetite changing, that kind of thing. Depression is certainly different from feeling sad. Okay, we all feel unhappy at various stages of our lives with something, and that's just general sadness. When you're suffering from depression, you're having more intense emotions. So those feelings of hopelessness, negativity, and helplessness, and they tend to sort of stay with you. Those feelings, they don't just sort of last a day or two and then disappear. They actually stay with you. And can sort of progress and become more deeper. Depression also affects people of any age. It saddens me to know that children suffer from depression. Not just adults, not just old people, not just mums, not just people that have become unemployed, but children. When I learnt that, I was just quite so shocked to think that children should even go through feelings of self-worth, loss of self-worth and sleeplessness. It's awful. Most people that suffer from depression usually only experience it once. And that's during the, it takes them to recover. Some people have regular bouts of it, and some people seem to never really come out of it. It's like a perpetual type of depression. Depression is very difficult for everybody around you. There's no two ways about it. Not only is the person, that be you or the person that you know of, suffers from it, but the people that it impacts your family, your friends, your work colleagues, people in the street, because everything about you changes and it affects them. It just affects them. So I'm going to read to you some of the signs and symptoms. Okay, so first of all, there's tiredness and loss of energy, sadness that doesn't go away, loss of self-confidence and self-esteem, difficulty concentrating, no longer being able to enjoy things that are usually pleasurable, feeling anxious all the time, avoiding other people, feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, having problems with your sleep patterns, having troubles getting to sleep, staying asleep, waking up early, having strong feelings of guilt to worthlessness, finding it hard to function at your work, your college or your school, loss of appetite, loss of sex drive and sexual problems, physical aches and pains, thinking about suicide and death and self-harm. So I'm reading you what they're like the standard list that you will find when you're looking at symptoms of depression. They vary from people to people. You don't have to have all of those symptoms, but you might generally have a number of those. I've suffered from depression myself. I'm just going to give you a brief sort of overview on that. I won't go into in-depth because I don't think you want to hear it, and I don't actually want to tell you that much. But I have suffered from a couple of periods of depression. The first one would be in 2010 when my dad died. My dad actually committed suicide. It came as a big shock to me. Obviously, I'm living here in the UK. He's in Australia. I get a phone call to tell me that he's died. I didn't know he'd committed suicide at that point. All I knew was that he died. It was only when I was over in Australia that my mum sat me down and spoke to me. Not even my brothers know that he took his life. She didn't want them to know, but she told me. And basically, my dad had a lot of medication. My dad was actually an invalid. He was near enough paralysed. He had a spinal problem, and what he did was we'd found out that my mother was suffering heart failure, and he basically, from what I'm understanding, could not cope with the thought of losing her. I mean, for 45 years, she'd been my mum, she'd been his wife. For 45 years, she'd been by his side. And I guess he looked at his own situation, and he looked at his own mortality and his dependency, and realised that without my mother there, that he would have no support. Or so he thought he'd have no support. Let's get it right. He would have had it, but he thought it. That's how he felt. He felt like there was nothing. And basically, he took an overdose of all of his medication. My dad was on an awful lot of medication, and some of it was quite lethal, obviously combined. He went to bed with my mum that night, and my mum said to me, it was strange because my dad was very OCD. So, let me put this back in perspective. I had a traditional parents, my father the breadwinner, my mother the housewife. That traditional old-fashioned, we don't agree with nowadays lifestyle, but those were my parents. My mum loved being the housekeeper. She loved baking, she loved cooking, she loved doing all those things, and my dad was very much the worker. But my dad was OCD, so some could say a bit of a twat. I will say that. And liked his home clean, and my mum liked the home clean too. That she was brought up that way, and she was from that era. So, but this night he actually turned around to her and he said, "Oh, come to bed," which was unusual. Don't do the dishes, come to bed. And they spoke till the early hours of the morning, and he talked about their lives together and about the children, me and my brothers, and all the things that were really important to him. And he actually told her how much he valued her, how important she was, and how much she meant to him, and how he never realised it until that moment. Now, I need to put this back in perspective. My dad was a bit of a twat. My dad was controlling, he was a bully, he had affairs behind my mother's back, he took her for granted. Just like a lot of those men of that era that didn't value their wives as an equal being. He took it for granted, that person that was with him for those 45 years. And it was only at that moment that he suddenly realised that he could not be without her, how important she was, and all of those things. But at that moment, he also realised he didn't want to be here anymore. So my mum didn't know this. And during the night, he took every single tablet that was in his bedside cabinet next to him. She woke up the next day and he was no longer with us. That was the first moment when I realised what he'd done, that I had so many questions that were left unanswered for me as a person growing up. I had many questions from my childhood, but I suddenly realised I could never ever get those answers. So I came back from Australia and came back to England, and I carried on my life with those at the back of my head. And it was about 6 months later that it all came crumbling down, and I'd started not sleeping very well. I started not feeling great about things. I wasn't doing, it was a slow process. I just was not doing a lot of things I used to enjoy. I stopped going out because I used to love clubbing. I'd stopped doing that. And in fact, I haven't clubbed since then. I stopped going out dancing and just enjoying life, and started crying a lot. And around that time, and I'm not going to go into the detail, but I was signed off work and I was medicated. I was medicated for 7 months. And it took me that long to deal with it. But also I decided I didn't want to stay medicated, so I weaned myself off. Against GP advice, of course. As you do. You think you're doing well, and you do. So, and I struggled a few times after that, but I sort of found other things that could take that brunt, and they were, I used to exercise quite a lot at that time, before I discovered that I had fibromyalgia, of course. I used to exercise a lot at that time, so I used to do a little bit more exercise, and I started just trying to be a bit more positive about things. And it was all about, I was able to deal with it myself, actually. And obviously the medication helped at the time. My next bout was actually 2016. In 2015, I had, I'm a union rep, as we all know. And in 2015, someone I was supporting took her life. For me, that was absolutely devastating, because I felt that there was something I could have done to prevent it. That feeling that you could have done something more is, I never understood how that feeling could pervade and continue to eat at me until, so this happened in 2015, so I dealt with it. 2016, I had a major data breach at work, and I won't go into it, but the data breach was in relation to the woman that committed suicide, in relation to stuff that would have come out in the press the year before. And I tried so hard to deal with it. I tried so hard. I knew what they'd done was wrong. I reported it. I did all the right things about reporting it and all that kind of thing. And there was an investigation. They were found to be in breach. They were found to be at fault. All of those things. But my head was not in the right place, because that action opened up a whole can. An absolute can. It opened up the can of this woman that had died, but it also opened up my dad's can. And it's hard to describe that feeling that you've got absolutely no ability to deal with it. I felt so completely helpless. I felt so hopeless. I just felt absolutely, I had no confidence whatsoever in anybody, absolutely anybody. I felt completely betrayed. And I'm not crying, by the way, that's because my nose is running. I can actually talk about this without crying now. There was a period of time I couldn't, but I ended up not being at work for a number of months, and I ended up on medication for quite a while. But what I did this time round is I absolutely fought for counselling. I fought for it. And the employer took ages. They dragged their heels on this, because I said to them, I expect you to provide the counselling, because I did, because they were the trigger for me. They triggered all of this. And they eventually came through and paid for my private counselling, which I still attend once a week on a Tuesday. That is where I am. And talking therapies, can I just say how valuable talking is? Talking is such a wonderful thing. It absolutely helps you deal with stuff. I don't recommend medication as the sole thing to cure this problem. It doesn't cure it. All medication does is it balances it. So if you've got balances in your body, because I can't go into this much further because I'm not medically trained, but I know that there's forms of depression like bipolar that require medication because of the imbalance in the body. That's one thing. But when you're feeling incredibly down and incredibly low, and there is a pinpoint of where that comes from, talking is a wonderful, wonderful tool. And enhanced with a medication, obviously, to help you sort of bring yourself to a level. Talking is wonderful, and for me it's been absolutely invaluable. I go and I talk about obviously far more than this now, but it's helped me to understand that I can make changes, that I can change things, that I can deal with things, and how to put mechanisms in to deal with a situation, how to resolve a situation, that kind of thing. I still have moments, don't get me wrong, I'm still struggling on a sort of up and down thing, but I feel the counselling is so important, and it doesn't matter how long you go to counselling for. Seriously, it doesn't matter. You could go for the next 50 years if you wanted to go to counselling, or you can go for like 7 sessions, which are the standard, and suddenly come out of it, whoa, I'm cured. But I'd find that hard to believe. I don't think 7 sessions, which employers offer you, is sufficient, because by the time you get to your 7th session, you've just unravelled the can. but then you need to dig in. So I think it's an ongoing process. So that's my experience of it. And I thought it was important when I talked about depression that I let you know that I'm not talking about something I don't know about or I haven't experienced, because I have experienced it. And I know I will experience it. And I know that there will be times, probably into my future, that something will trigger this again. I hope not, but I'm fully aware that it, for me, I've suffered 2 bouts of it, so it's possible that it may happen again, and I just need to learn how to cope better. People will often say, people with depression or seeking counselling are weak. I hear that, and that's why a lot of people don't talk about their mental health issues, because people make them feel like it's weak. It's not weak at all. There's nothing weak about it, and there's nothing weak about seeking help. We are all human beings. I think what's weak is to not acknowledge that you've got something. That's weak. But to acknowledge it and to deal with it, I believe that that's the strongest thing that you can do. And never let people put you off by their judgments. People that judge, what's that saying about glass houses and throwing stones? Because depression is something that affects people everywhere at some stage of their life. It affects them, or it affects someone that they know, someone they're close to, a family member. And to be cruel to people because of a mental health issue is to be cruel to themselves and to family, because they don't know when they might be affected by it. They don't know when someone they're close to might be affected by it. So it's such a thing. And I think with today's society as well, more and more people are coming out with suffering from this. I mean, I believe this has been going on for many years, many years, back into the dark ages, or the back ages, or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's becoming more prevalent now with the society we live in, and I think we spend a lot more time thinking about our own mortalities. We spend a lot more time, especially with social media, worried about what people think about us, how people react to us. I mean, I was talking with someone from work the other day, and we were talking about Instagram, and we were talking about Twitter, and all social media, Facebook. And we seem to all define ourselves by how many times you put a post on there, and we define ourselves by how many likes we get. It's really important we get so many likes, because if we don't get so many likes, why? There's something wrong. Or, my picture, I don't look that great. How crazy is that? How crazy is that we define our lives these days in this modern world? That's how we look. And our children are doing that. So I think depression and forms of depression are becoming more prevalent with the way society is going, and that's a real concern. And I think it's really important that we see the signs of this, so that we, as observers, as well as people that maybe experience it, can address it at the early onset, rather than to let it fester and linger. Because let me tell you, depression gets worse. It can get worse. It can severely affect your life. It can severely affect the lives of the people around you. And for some people, it ends their life. And that's the really important bit to understand, that for some people, depression can lead to the end of their lives. And that's why it's important to look out for the signs. Now, the other part of this coffee was to talk about the impact in the virtual world. Now, for me personally, my life in the virtual world actually helps with my depression. I'm a very creative person, and they say that a lot of very creative people tend to suffer depression more so than other people. And yeah, I agree with that. My son suffers from depression. He's very creative, my son, very, very extremely creative. And I've come across a number of people in my life that are like that. My dad was creative. My dad was are you sitting down? My dad was a psychologist. I know, a psychologist that suffered depression, that went on to take his own life. Yeah, but he was a great psychologist. He was really good at what he did. he dealt with people with depression. He dealt with people with all sorts of disorders, and he helped them. He was really good at it. But he himself suffered it. So he was very good like that. My dad was also a painter and a writer. So he painted the most obscure, I'm telling you, the most obscure paintings, but they were very, very good. And he wrote such very deep, insightful things about life and about psychology. Yet you would never have known that this would happen to him. And it's true what they say. It's more creative people, I think, tend to suffer this, and I think it's because. Actually, I don't know why I think it's because. Who am I to say? But it is something that I've often heard. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But yeah, in my life, it's been that way. You know, and there are different types of depression. There is the clinical depression, for example, bipolar disorder. Believe me, if someone is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, be prepared to have a different life. I was partnered in real life to someone with bipolar disorder for about a year. And we couldn't work out because I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't deal with it because it actually, his mood swings affected me to the point where I was actually feeling worthless myself because of what he manifested on me. I won't go into it, but I couldn't be in a relationship any longer with that person because of that, because it was like destroying me. It was destructive to me. He'd be the person that I've gone to Scotland and visited a number of times, and I keep at a distance as a friend, but I could never get involved with again emotionally because I can't handle, and I can admit it, I can't handle that intensity of that depression. It's very difficult. So if you're with someone who is suffering this, remember you're either in it for the long haul or you're not in it at all, because the long haul will have impacts on you. The long haul will be up and down all the time, and you have to learn your own coping mechanisms and the signs and how to deal with that. I wasn't very good at the time. I didn't understand it, and even now when I have visited him, I'll go up there and he'll be in a jolly great mood, and then within 24 hours the mood is terrible. I feel claustrophobic. I feel like I need to run. It's a horrible feeling, because when you're with someone like that, it's very dark. It can be very dark, but then it can also be very vibrant and alive. So, but I'm not going to go into that because that's my own personal experience and it doesn't apply to everybody. But I would say that if you are with someone, remember you're in it for the long haul. It doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear. You can maintain it, but they have it for life. But the virtual world. Sorry, I digressed a little bit. The virtual world, I think what you need to understand, the importance of it. I mean, for me, it's been a positive, but for some people, they suffer. For example, people that suffer depression suffer it for many different reasons. Some could be for disability, severe health issues, intense loneliness, a terrible, terrible home life. But they go into the virtual world as their escape. So escape is a great thing sometimes, but the thing with the virtual world is you can both be challenged in there by having dynamic friendships and really meet people, connect with them, have relationships, they have a great impact on you. But the flip side of it is when the relationships turn sour or the people aren't so nice. If you're suffering with depression or there's someone that's suffering with depression, the impact it has on them is probably a lot greater, I feel, personally, than what would happen in real life. Because in real life, you have days, you have weeks, you have months, you've got years to deal with situations. In the virtual world, everything is sort of like crammed into it feels like forever, but it's in a bubble. but it's actually a short space of time. So all those overwhelming emotions suddenly get crammed and happen at a faster pace. So with someone suffering from anything that's like depression, and they have a break of a relationship, the impact it has on them is absolutely mega. It's mega in their real life, and it's mega in their second life. And that's the thing. And also loneliness. You know, anyone suffering from loneliness, I have to say, the virtual world can be full of vibrancy and full of great people. But you know what? A lot of the time, unless you've got those people in your life, it's a lonely, lonely path. I mean, I found that. You know, I'm a friendly person, but I kind of like being on my own because I like to do my stuff. But I also found that actually you could disappear into loneliness in there. You could be very intensely lonely. And if your mindset isn't right at that time, it could be magnified, 20 times. So there is that to consider. And I just think if you're someone that knows of someone that's suffering from depression, and you observe them in a virtual world, keep an eye on them. Certainly keep an eye on them just to see how they are reacting in real life as well, because you don't want their depression to be magnified by an experience and encounter that they have in a virtual world. And if it's you don't want to, you want to heal, you don't want to make it any worse. I always recommend, if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling to that point, there's a button and it's called log out. Walk away, take the time before you come back, heal yourself, then come back. But don't sit in there, because I think the magnification of everything is so intense. It's not good for your health. Absolutely not good for your health. And I have witnessed that by Facebook feeds. I've witnessed someone in a relationship that broke up, and about the devastating stuff that I've been seeing on Facebook. It's been awful. And I just want to sometimes go, stop. Just stop, switch it off, walk away. At the end of the day, real life matters first. So your real life matters first. Deal with that depression. Deal with those negative feelings first before you step back into a virtual world, because I think the virtual world will just magnify it tenfold. But that also leads me on to how you behave to people. And I'm not talking about depressed people. I'm talking about the people that don't spot those signs, the people that are ignorant. I'm talking about the trolls who go around and be mean to people for the hell of being mean, because they find it funny. And I've seen some of them when they film it and they pop it on YouTube, and it's hilarious, and they get thousands of views. And they sort of disturbing people and mocking them and all that kind of thing. Have you ever stopped to think who that person is that you're mocking, that person that you're hounding, you're annoying? Have you ever stopped to think who they are on the other side of that screen, and what they are and what they're going through, what their lives might be like, whether they're severely disabled, whether they're suffering from severe depression, whether their home life is that bad that their only escape is to log into the virtual? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Because you need to. You are responsible for your behaviour, and you're also responsible for what you inflict upon someone else. Just because someone's suffering from mental health issues, don't say that that's your problem. It's not their problem. It's our problem. It's all of our problem. If someone is suffering from mental health issues, you are just as responsible to not behave in a negative way, not behave in a way that would actually make things worse for them. Don't be mean to people. It's as simple as that. Just don't be mean. Unfortunately, I can say this, and with all the intense, well of the world and through rose-coloured glasses, the fact is the world is made up of various people and various types of people, and they exist all the time, and unfortunately. So I just think if you see someone behaving like that's a friend of yours that is behaving in a negative way, think again whether that friendship's worth it. I'd sit there and question whether I want to be friends with that person. I do in the real world. If I come across someone that's a bully or just a nasty piece of whatever, I tend to not talk to them again. I don't want to know them. I don't want them in my life, because I don't need them in my life. So But I also have to say, people that behave like that, there's something wrong with them. I do deeply believe that. I do believe that people that troll people and hound them and harass them and, you know, work on people's so-called weaknesses because they can't deal with situations. People that do that themselves, I think there's something wrong with them, that they have their own mental health issues that they need to sort out. I always recommend those people to go to counselling myself. And then I just mute them. But anyhow, I hope the person that asked me to do this kind of answers what you wanted me to talk about. I was very wary of this topic because it's such a huge topic, and I'm certainly no clinician that I could give a great diagnosis and whatever. I can't do that. I'm not qualified to do that. The only thing I'm qualified to do is express it from my viewpoint as someone who's having suffered from depression. But there are various forms and people are different than me. But, so, I hope that's helped. Excuse my nasalness. I'm just not well. And hopefully by next week's Coffee with Isa, I'll be a lot more perkier. Thank you for listening, and as I've been told to say all the time, if you like what you're listening to and you want to come back and see it again, please hit the subscribe button and that little bell thing, apparently, because it sends you an email to tell you when I've uploaded again. All that's left to say is have a jolly great week, and I will no doubt see you this week in a blog post, but I'll also see you next week for Coffee with Isa. Bye bye.